I'm your host and facilitator, Billy Ryan, and I want to welcome you to the Black Church Leadership Podcast with Master Life Coach and NLP practitioner, Apostle Martin Wilson. Apostle Wilson's goal for creating this podcast is to help you, as a church leader, to remove the spiritual, mental, and psychological hindrances that keep you from being the best version of yourself. We now go to our broadcast already in progress.
Grace and peace. This is Bishop Wilson. Welcome to the Black Church Leadership, where we try to help you as a pastor reach the best version of yourself. So we've created this particular podcast for those pastors of small to medium-sized churches that want to develop themselves as great leaders. It's me, and I come to share with you some information that I think is very vital for us that stand behind the pulpit, those of us that have a message that we want to be able to convey to the people that God has placed us over or to work with. So today I want to talk to you about how to connect with your audience. How to connect with your audience. And I've come to really love the subject of communication. And great communicators have the ability to connect with their audience. And when you find a great communicator, a person that really understands communication, they have the power to make people laugh. They have the power to make people cry. They have the power to make people change. But how do they do that? How do they convey their message in such a way that they can move people to action? So in the next few moments, I want to share with you some of the things that I'm learning from Dr. John Maxwell. It's a great new book out by Dr. John Maxwell, The 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication. You want to get this book. This is a must-have book for anyone who speaks, anyone who leads, is to understand the laws of communication. That's by Dr. John C. Maxwell. You need to pick up that book. So I just want to give you a few tips that I've picked up since I've been reading this book. And I think that they will really help you as a leader to be able to better communicate your message, your vision that God has given you. So I want to give you seven. I want to give you 7 tips that I believe that will help you to be able to better connect with your audience. Tip number 1, it's always about connection. It's always about connection. The law of connection states that nothing happens until you connect with your audience. So how do you connect? How do you do that? First thing that you've got to do, you've got to focus on your audience instead of yourself. Great communicators have learned that it's all about the people. It's all about the people. And you've got to check your ego at the door. You've got to begin to focus on the needs of the audience. What do these people need that is going to help them grow and to be better? And it's not about what I'm wearing. It's not about what I'm not wearing. It's not about who's there or who's not there or what they think or what I think about myself. It's all about the people. If you are focused on the people and not yourself, you will be better able to connect with your audience. Tip number 2, less is more. Now, if you're like me, you've come up in the church and there's been times that you have been happy to see a speaker to stand up. And then there's been times when you've been happy to see speakers sit down. And if you're going to be a great speaker or presenter, you have to know your content. Know your content. Know what you're teaching. Know what you're preaching. Your message needs to be clear. It needs to be very, very precise. And you need to take the time to study and be familiar with your material. If you're going to stand up and you're worried about your content, then you're not prepared. Then on the other end of the same coin, communicators understand that speaking is not about finishing the content. We study the content. We're familiar with the content. We know our content. But on the other end of that same coin, it's not about finishing. It's not about making sure that you hear everything that I have in my notes. It's about connecting with the audience. Stop worrying about saying everything that's on your paper. If you don't hear me say anything else, get that today. Stop worrying about saying everything that's on your paper and focus on making that connection. If you're a pastor, you should understand how important it is for you to make that connection. Great speakers understand that when you speak less, it's really more. It's better for you to take 15 minutes and find that point in your message where you're connecting, that point of connection, and spend the next 15 to 20 minutes there than trying to rush to cover all of the content that you have on your paper and breaking the connection. Tip number three, the power of conviction. The power of conviction. Now, to make a real impact when you speak, you need to put on your teacher's hat instead of being in preacher mode. Of course, now we all love to preach, but if you're going to make an impact, you've got to learn how to teach, because we're confusing the emotional response that we're getting from people with impact. But if you want to impact people, you've got to put on your teacher's hat. Now, yet these principles still work in the context of preaching if you can do it right. Many people have been preached to death and are literally spiritually malnutrition for a lack of sound teaching. So rather than relying solely on our charisma to pull on the heartstrings of people's emotion, great communicators use conviction to motivate action. Now, the word conviction in this context, it means to convince. Can you convince your listeners that what you're saying is beneficial for their life? Emotional responses don't guarantee action. And that's why we got to be careful about knowing how to preach and to tune up with the organ, and we getting an emotional response. When a person makes a decision and it's solely on emotional response, once the emotion passes, so the desire or the urgency for action. We want people taking action because they're convinced that this will make them a better person. That is them making a rational decision and not a knee-jerk response. Conviction happens when you as a communicator make that connection with another person. That connection has to be there. When people believe they can take the same actions and achieve the same results as you did, you sharing your story, they're more likely to take action and to move forward. That's what we want. We don't want to just get people happy. We need people to take action. Tip number 4, action is key. The greatest indicator of your success is not how loud the people respond, not how your ovation, not how much they dance. That's not the indicator of success for a great communicator. The greatest indicator of success for you as a speaker is when you see people taking action, when you see people's lives changing. If your motive for speaking is not to motivate people to take action, you've missed the whole point of being at the pulpit. You've missed the whole point of being at the lectern. You've missed the whole point of standing up in front of your team. You want to move them to action. You've missed the whole point if that's not your motive. No one has ever thought or hoped their way into success. When you finish speaking, you should want people to do something. You should aim to move people emotionally, physically, and spiritually. But too many times we're just moving them emotionally. Great communicators, they provide action steps. In other words, I just don't want you to move. I'm going to give you action steps that you need to take in your life after this message is over. Things that you need to do when you get home. Great communicators provide those action steps and show people what to do. Pastors call for discipleship. Teachers assign homework. Podcasters give a call to action. All great communicators have an action step. Number 5, assess your impact. Another important thing that you have to do as a great communicator is to assess your impact. And you do this before, during, and after you're speaking. Before, during, and after you're speaking, you're assessing your impact. Now, in this context, impact refers to the effect that the speaker has on the audience. The speaker should assess whether they are making a connection. That when you're up teaching, am I connecting with my audience? Am I creating an atmosphere where the audience can be impacted? You've got to ask yourself, how do I want to impact? That you've got to ask that even before you get up. How do I want to impact this audience? And while you're up speaking, am I making the impact that I wanted to be able to make? After, I've got to ask myself, did I create an atmosphere for them to be impacted? So that the next time that you get up and speak, you're taking all of that information and you're using it to make yourself a better speaker, a better presenter. Tip number 6, pause and reflect. Don't be afraid of the moments of silence. When you do this, a lot of times you're giving the audience time to reflect and think about what you're saying to them. Now, when the connection is made, their actions will be much more solidified than the person that seeks to take action based on the emotional response that we talked about earlier. You want to pause. You want to give people time to reflect on what you're saying. Last tip, tip number 7. As a communicator, you're responsible to the people, but you're not responsible for the people. You're responsible to give them the way to succeed. But at the end, people are responsible for themselves. Remember, you have to live in that moment. Live in that moment. Don't be afraid to ask people for a commitment so that they can go away and create results. By following these lessons, you can become a great communicator who connects with your audience and creates positive change in their life. So listen, this is the Black Church Leadership Podcast with me, Coach Martin Wilson. I hope that you've enjoyed this today. I want to see you become the best communicator that you can possibly do. And the main thing that you have to do is connect with the people. Until next time, remember, God is the greatest power, and you are absolutely not defeated. God bless.
You have been listening to the Black Church Leadership Podcast with Master Life Coach and NLP practitioner, Apostle Martin Wilson. We ask that you follow Apostle on all major podcast outlets.
Sponsored by Billy Ryan Life and Executive Coaching, and the Ecclesia Ecumenical Leadership and Church Growth Development Network. Executive Producer, Billy Ryan.